Everyone's already used to using physical identity, whether that's your passport, your driving license, or some other form of ID. But now digital identity is really gaining momentum. Do we really need it? What opportunities might it create for businesses? And is it going to make life easier or more difficult for consumers? Let's take a look at those questions in this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends, and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the second season of the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, which we are launching to coincide with the publication this month of the second edition of our Navigating Digital Payments report. My name's David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline, and I'm delighted to be welcoming back to the podcast a fantastic guest. We have joining us today Dr Michael Salmony. He is an internationally recognised leader on strategy of business innovations in digital and financial services, and he has a particular focus on all things related to payments, open finance, fintech, digital identity and electronic money and central bank digital currencies. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, David, for your kind words and for inviting me back.
So in a moment, I really want to dive into this topic of digital identity, but I know you've had a chance to take a quick look at the second edition of our Navigating Digital Payments report. Any first comments or reactions that you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, very impressive report covering lots of interesting areas. I particularly like the cash section, if I can be honest, a very traditional, old form of payment, but I thought you gave a very interesting insight on what it means if we were to get rid of cash, for example, and what the trajectory might be. Yeah, lots of very interesting topics. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Michael. And it was interesting, I think, as a kind of thought exercise, that particular chapter, because I think probably everyone appreciates we're a long way off actually having a fully cashless society in any countries. But it's interesting to think about what would you need to do in order to make that happen, really.
If you invite me back, we can have another talk about CBDC, which is all about that.
So maybe that's already a teaser for your third episode on the podcast, Michael. That would be awesome. So when it comes to digital identity, I guess what's really on a lot of people's minds is what's it going to mean for merchants, banks and consumers, and especially what do they need to be thinking about doing now to be prepared for that, to be ready. So I'm very interested to get your insights on that, Michael, but maybe first you could start by giving a really simple kind of explanation of what's really meant by digital ID.
Yeah, sure. I mean, digital ID seems to me the foundation of everything we do nowadays. We're all moving into the digital space. We all have to prove it's really me and that it's really this bank and it's really this fintech and it's really this connected IoT device. So identity, who is who and who is talking to who and what rights do they have, what attributes do they have, is surely the basis of everything we do. But unfortunately, we've been building these digital cathedrals up into the sky for the last decades and building it all on sand. So I think it's high time we have some digital identity.
So you mean really a way when you're online, not just to kind of authenticate, to log in to a system, but to actually prove it is you, Michael Salmony, or for me to prove it is me, David Daly. Is that what you're getting at there, Michael?
Yes, partially. It's not a digital version of a passport or of a driving license. You know, we're already doing that. We're taking a photo of some government document and attaching that as a JPEG into an email and sending that to a bank so that they can open my account. That is ghastly. You know, the hackers love that because there's so much information there which they can harvest. It's far too much data in there, which is absolutely no concern. You know, like when I show my passport when I'm checking into a hotel. It's none of the business of the lovely girl behind the counter, how old I am, what stamps I have in my passport, what my home address is. And GDPR already requires data minimization. So this whole idea of using passports or just images of passports is completely outdated and actually quite illegal. So the digital identity aims to do that much better. It's a verification of attributes. So only verifies that the girl who wants to get into the disco is over 18 and her name is of no relevance to the bouncer and where she lives and all these other things. So we need to think much more about attributes and in a digital way. So that's one side of digital identity, and the other one is it's not only about people. We also have to identify that this is really the bank I'm talking to, that this is really the connected fridge which wants to order some new milk. Is that allowed to? Is it really that one? And is it allowed to access my bank account? Is it really this fintech? Is this connected car really allowed to order some petrol or a coffee for me? You know, we need to think much more about all the elements that are now connected. And that's not only people, it is software and things and devices. And that's the way, I think, to think about digital identity.
And that is interesting. I know when we were working on the chapter about digital identity, we had quite some discussion about what it even means. Because I think, firstly, there are people who would class it as simply the digitization of physical ID. So having your driving license in your Apple Wallet, for example. I think there are also people who would say digital identity is your entire kind of online presence, let's say, the digital trace that you leave. And then I think there is this third definition, which I think you're alluding to here, Michael, which is it's a way to unambiguously prove something about yourself, but it's more about proving, as you say, if you're hiring a car, proving that you have a driving license rather than necessarily sharing with the rental company all the information on your driving license.
Exactly.
So before we sort of look at what's happening in the future, could you give us a little bit of an idea of how this has developed so far?
Well, it's been a bit of a mess, quite honestly. In Germany alone, there are 58 different e-identity initiatives, all in parallel, because there are some ones done by the government, there are some done by a bank with a couple of its favorite merchants, there are some private ones, there are some telephone companies who've set up ID. It is a complete disaster. What, of course, we need is some harmonized or at least interoperable set of solutions so that it doesn't matter whether I just want to prove that I'm over 18 and whether I'm doing it on a phone or on a computer or towards my bank or with my bank, that is secondary. So we need an open protocol which is standardized, which connects all the elements together. And that's where I think, again, Europe has come up with a really revolutionary proposal.
And just before we come on to that, Michael, so am I right in thinking then in that German case that you're mentioning, if you say wanted to accept those forms of identification, you'd have to interface with every different system individually, or is there some interoperability already there in place?
No, these things are all silos, which means it's a complete disaster. There are a few, like, for example, Yes, which has a more sort of end-to-end view, which I think is quite nice. Like, for example, if you want to buy a new phone, right? Mm-hmm. It has all the little bits in there to prove, yes, it's really me. Please send the phone to this address. It verifies my address. It sets up the direct debit from my account so that every month the phone bill is paid. It verifies that I'm over 18. All the little bits that are needed when you just buy a new phone and sign up to a contract are just done with one authentication. I think that's a very clever thing, but this is one specific solution which works only with certain banks and in certain environments. And of course, we need something pan-European nowadays, and if not global, where it doesn't matter where you bank, where you have your phone, which works across all our digital services.
So maybe you can say a bit more about that then now, Michael, where digital ID is going in the near future and what the EU is doing on that.
Yeah, I mean, they had a first attempt with the wonderful name of eIDAS 1.0, which wasn't very successful because it was the old paradigm. It's basically a government ID which you turn into a digital form, and nobody's interested in that. The eIDAS 2.0, which is now coming out and has been defined, has gone through the various legislative procedures, that is exactly the right thing in my view. I mean, it has a few warts on it, but the principle that this is an attribute-based system which works across Europe. You have mutual recognition across countries. It is cross-industry. It's not just a government thing, but it works with banks, with telcos, and with merchants. I think those are some of the attributes of this which are really great.
Just to make it really clear then, as I understand it, if I had registered for an ID in Germany, say, I would then be able to use that in the Netherlands to open a bank account, or in France to prove that I'm over 18 to buy alcohol. The idea is you would have one digital ID that you've registered in one European country, and you can then use it to prove things about yourself in any European country.
That's exactly right. It's actually a wallet. So it's a wallet which contains a lot of attributes, which contains my academic credentials, whether I've had a COVID vaccination, whether I have a bank account, whether I'm over 18, all these attributes. And yes, you can use them cross-border. So von der Leyen actually said this is for every use case, from opening a bank account to hiring a bicycle. So it's completely for all use cases, and it means, for example, a student can inscribe themselves into Maastricht University from Italy without having a bank account in the Netherlands, without having a social security number in the Netherlands, etc. This is a cross-border recognition of these wallets using attributes.
It reminds me a little bit of payments in a strange way. Not all. Certainly in the time that I can remember, we had to travel in Europe. You had to exchange currencies. Cards didn't necessarily work in every country. And this is maybe doing the same a little bit for digital identity that we have seen happening in payments over the last 10 to 20 years.
This is actually something I've been banging on about for decades, completely unsuccessfully, as one can see, saying that this is a complete parallel. In payments, we've developed the four-corner model. That means it doesn't matter where you bank, and it doesn't matter where the merchant banks, you will always be able to pay. And it just goes through your bank talks to the merchant's bank. It's a four-corner model. And exactly that is what is needed in identity. It doesn't matter where the proof of my over 18 or my academic credentials or my COVID certificate comes from, and it doesn't matter who needs this. These things just need to be connected, for example, in a four-corner model. And that is why actually a number of banks in the Nordics, who are always smarter than all of us, actually did this originally. The banks said this is actually an opportunity. We've already built a four-corner model which connects all users and all merchants, and we can transfer money through that, but we can also transport identity through that. And I always thought that was a super clever idea, but unfortunately it's become a niche in the Nordics and has not conquered the world, although I think that was a very smart way of doing it. And incidentally also a great strategic and business opportunity for banks, but that's another topic.
And I was going to say, and on the timeline, when is this likely to happen or become a reality in the EU?
Yeah, I mean, the law has been passed. The rollout is now that in 2026, every citizen in the EU has the right to have one of these wallets if they want. So there's all the states are mandated to have at least one wallet made available to all citizens. And then each member state will have to decide, is it going to be banks issuing this wallet, or telcos, or the government themselves? Who are they going to be the players? So everybody's now getting ready to make this happen, so that in a year or two, we will all be able to use the digital identity wallets for all the use cases I've just tried to describe.
And I was going to say, when you were talking about the parallel with payments, you mentioned the fact that I suppose banks and merchants are two of the key potential stakeholders in this. I think it's really interesting to think about the impact for merchants. So, Michael, what are merchants going to be able to do that they can't do now once this kind of digital ID for everyone in the EU becomes the norm?
Right. I mean, one thing that is clear, they're going to have a much more harmonized way of verifying things like your address, or whether you're over 18, or whether it's really you and not some hacker. So that's going to be a major cost benefit, because they just have a unified thing, even independent where the customer is in Europe. And also they can do some things which they really weren't able to do before. Like, for example, age verification. We keep coming back to that simple example, but somebody who sells alcohol is liable for criminal prosecution if he sends a bottle of whiskey to an underage person. And there's no real way of verifying that at the moment, except for sending a photocopy of your father's passport. And now you can finally actually do the proper legal verification of over 18, just to take one example, which reduces the risk massively for some merchants in the gaming and various other areas.
Again, that's interesting on two counts. So one is, I was thinking how digital payments have inevitably become more important as more shopping moved online, because it's harder. I mean, it is possible, but it's harder to collect cash for a service when someone is buying online than it is when you're in person. So I suppose that's where digital ID also gets a special benefit, is if you're having to do some of this verification for an online purchase. The other thing, I suppose, is the different attributes that could be interesting about someone. So I suppose, as you say, age verification if you're shipping alcohol makes a lot of sense. Could it even be used for a delivery address if someone doesn't already have an account for the merchant, that type of thing, Michael?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was already in this Yes system I mentioned before, right? So that if you want your phone adapter sent home, you have the address verified. And, a bank verified shipping address is worth real money to a merchant, because quite a lot of stuff doesn't arrive and doesn't, because the address is wrong, and hackers find it harder to impersonate somebody. And, a bank verified shipping, or it doesn't have to be a bank, it could be somebody else, but a verified delivery address is something of real value. And that's when, of course, business cases start emerging.
I'm also imagining in travel, I mean, could it be when you're booking airline tickets or checking in for a flight that you won't have to type in all your passport details manually?
Oh, yes, please. I mean, I spent quite a lot of time going through airports, and the number of times I show my passport and show my reservation code, the 6-digit code, which you have to type in some ghastly terminal, because Lufthansa wonders how many Michael Salmonys are standing at Frankfurt Airport and wondering which flight I might possibly be taking. I mean, this is obviously, if you have proper identity. In Japan, for example, and Korea, they're already using face recognition technology. I mean, there's some privacy issue there, of course, but I certainly would sign up that as I enter the airport building, it recognizes me and it knows, yes, I've got a ticket to fly me to London, and doesn't ask for my passport, my reservation codes, my booking number, and all that stupid stuff about 5 times before I've got into the aeroplane.
Yeah. It might also relieve some anxiety, because I don't know if it's just me. I always worry because, particularly if I'm booking flights for my family, the names of the booking always have to match exactly the names on the passports. And I always worry that I'm going to enter one erroneously, and then only when I come to check in realise that I've made a mistake. But so I guess car rental is probably another area, isn't there, where it could save some time on proving that you have a driving license, that you are allowed to drive.
But again, let me make the point, it's not only about people. Maybe I can give you a recent example of that. Now that interest rates are going up, I actually wanted to see where I can get a bit more interest for the money. I've sort of saved up for my retirement. And I went to a comparison engine, and it said Crédit Agricole are actually now offering 4%. And so I clicked on the link and was taken to the Crédit Agricole website, and I sort of started typing in the application form to open an account with them. And I thought, hang on a moment, how do I know this link has really taken me to Crédit Agricole and not some hacker site? And I'm here starting to enter all sorts of very private data, again, sending a photocopy of my passport, of course. And then finally, I will actually be sending the money. How do I actually know the counterpart is really this bank? So it's also about verifying things and organizations. It's not only about people.
And I was going to say, I mean, we've talked a bit about merchants there. What other roles do you see for banks and other businesses in this kind of digital identity, I suppose, ecosystem that will emerge?
Well, I've always thought that this is a prime opportunity for banks, because they've already done the KYC on everybody. They already have the data. They know you're over 18. They know your address. They know all sorts of other attributes. And they could provide those as a service to others. So if I want to verify to my phone provider or to my alcohol shop online that I'm over 18 and it is to be shipped there, that is a service that a bank could provide, using, for example, the four-corner model we talked about earlier. And this is what happens in the Nordics. Bank ID is used for thousands of services. Even if I log on to the government, it's via the bank ID, right? And if I want to change my bin collection dates, right, I would use bank ID. So thousands of services. So I think it's a great position for the banks as providers of trust to build on that, to become providers of trust in a much wider context, to protect also society and not have sort of some players who we maybe don't want in there as the providers. It's a strategic opportunity, and it's also a business opportunity, right? I mean, if you look on the dark web, you can see how much identity is worth, how much is the password to PayPal and to Google and to your fitness club and everything worth, and so there clearly is a business behind this, and that's why banks are actually monetizing this and the KYC data, which is previously only a cost. So I've always thought this is a big opportunity, both strategically and commercially, for banks.
So a big role for them to play, potentially. So in a moment, Michael, maybe we can finish off by finding out your views on this interesting topic, actually, of whether payments and ID might actually merge in the end. And also maybe concretely what people need to be doing to get ready now. But first, I would just like to remind people that if you want to get in touch with the podcast, let us know topics you'd like us to discuss or any other feedback, then you can reach us by emailing ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And of course, also my usual reminder to please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. That way you will never miss an episode and always stay up to date with the latest trends in payments. So, Michael, yes, this question of payments and digital ID and whether they might one day merge and essentially become the same thing. What's your view on that?
They are already merging. I don't think they will become the same thing because they're addressing different topics, right? But you can already see, for example, in the large-scale pilots which are happening around this EU wallet, where lots of parties are coming together to really try it and pilot it and shape the final standards and regulations. There are always banks in there, and there are some payments use cases. So one of the large-scale pilots addresses travel, for example. How do you make travel better? And of course, you need to pay for your ticket and get paid back if the flight is delayed, and you get some compensation. So there are some payment elements. And one thing that is already in the legislation, as it is planned, is that this wallet will do the SCA, will do the authentication. So you will prove that yes, you do want to make that payment via your identity wallet. So there are all sorts of linkages between the two topics. That's for sure.
And do you think, from the user perspective, then, I'm thinking that now, for example, sometimes if I use Apple Pay, in my view, quite cleverly, it will pre-populate my delivery address, and it'll actually, in the Apple Pay application, add on the correct postage, or sometimes show me the postage options. And then I choose the postage option, I click pay, and then the order is placed. So it really is very straightforward. But in these more complex examples, like we talked about booking flights, for example, is it possible that somehow integrated into that payment experience is the passport details for the check-in, or for car rental, the driving license, or for alcohol purchase, the fact that I'm over 18? So there's no, from the user point of view, there's no separate step to validate those credentials.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just like we said before for the merchant, there's a more harmonized way of verifying the address and the age and the payment and everything. So also for the user, I will always go via the wallet, if it's done well, and verify, yes, I do want to pay, and yes, I will always see a screen showing, are you happy that I'm sharing your address and your age and your payment details with this merchant? If you click OK, then you can do all these things in one fell swoop in a harmonized way, irrespective of which merchant you're talking to, whether you're renting a car or a bicycle, or whether you're inscribing yourself as a student in Maastricht, or whatever the use case. And that's a very harmonizing thing. And although also I love Apple dearly and use my iPhone all the time, maybe I don't want everything at Apple, right? And that's why I think this neutral wallet is a better idea.
And so then maybe coming back to this main question that we raised right at the start. So in your view, what do merchants, banks, other businesses, what do they need to be actually doing now, Michael, to be getting ready for this change?
Well, I would encourage anybody who's thinking about this or has some of the pain points we've been talking about, to really look at the identity space. And there are plenty of things happening. I mean, there are lots of private initiatives. There's some regulatory initiatives. Australia, for example, is rolling out Connect ID, which is another interesting one. There are global initiatives like GAIN, which are attempting to make this a global topic, which with our increasing globalization is probably a good approach. So maybe delve into that, and that's where people like me sort of do a little bit of consulting and help people on this journey, because identity is just becoming more to the forefront, also since crime, identity fraud and impersonation is becoming an ever bigger topic. There's a real need for this. And there's also a huge opportunity, not only the sort of strategic and commercial topics we've been talking about, but also just the convenience and the security. I mean, there are things like behavioral biometrics emerging now, where just by the way I hold my phone, the way I type on the screen, whether I hold the phone in the left hand or the right hand, these are all attributes which are very reliably able to add a lot of confidence that it's really you and really you who want to make that payment. The idea that you actually enter a password or a PIN or get an SMS code sent to you, is becoming increasingly irrelevant. And so there are all these new technologies around biometrics and others which allow both convenience and security at the same time. This used to be a contradiction. You were either really secure, but very inconvenient because you had to do 17 verification steps, or you did 17 verification steps, but that, of course, is a ghastly user experience. Now, at last, we can get both convenience and security. So I think it's a really interesting space to watch. And if the merchants don't want to have lots of cart abandonments, if we want to reduce fraud, if we want to really make this whole digital world better, then I think identity is the key.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for all of those insights. I think it was firstly, it was interesting to clarify what digital ID really is, and that it's not the simple digitization of a passport or of a driving license. Then I think interesting to draw that parallel with payments and how you need something like the four-corner model to make digital ID work. And then, of course, I think fascinating to hear the use cases, how this can enable merchants to provide a more seamless, frictionless experience to their customers, but also, as you said, how it can help to reduce fraud at the same time, make it safer for people to complete these transactions. So really quite a wide-ranging discussion in the end. But Michael, I must say it was really a great pleasure to welcome you back to Navigating Digital Payments, and let's get you booked in for a follow-up discussion on cash and CBDCs. Thank you very much, Michael.
Always a pleasure, David. Thank you.
And that just, of course, leaves me to thank you, our dear listeners, for joining us again for this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.